My parents handed me a $275,000 bill for raising me and expected payment immediately. So I pulled out my own folder and replied, I kept track of everything you owe me too. The room went completely silent. I never thought I'd be the one posting something like this. I usually read stories here thinking there's no way people like that actually exist. Well, turns out they do, and sometimes they are your own parents. Some background first because it's important for the full picture. I'm an only child. Growing up, it always felt like I was living in a business transaction, not a family. My parents, let's call them Victor and Marianne, were the type who would remind you of every little thing they ever did for you. Got good grades? Well, you should have ate the food they bought. Better say thank you every time or they'd accuse you of being ungrateful. Need help with a school project that came with a full lecture afterward about how their time was valuable. It wasn't like they were struggling financially either. Victor has been in real estate for decades, and Marianne used to manage a local bookstore before she retired early to focus on the home. Her words, money wasn't endless, but it was there. Yet somehow I was raised to feel like I was constantly a burden. Birthdays were strange. Instead of celebrating, they would make a point of listing all the expenses they had to cover that month, and my gifts would usually come with a comment like, "We had to tighten the budget to afford this, so appreciate it." I learned early on to keep my expectations low. Despite everything, I worked hard, got good grades, earned a scholarship, and moved out at 18. From that point on, I kept a polite distance. Phone calls on birthdays, maybe a short visit during the holidays if I had the energy. I think deep down, I was always hoping they'd eventually realize how toxic things had been and try to make it right. That brings us to 2 weeks ago. It was a Thursday evening, and I had just gotten home from work. I work in software development now. Nothing glamorous, but it pays well and gives me the quiet life I always wanted. I was making dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marianne. Family meeting Sunday, 3 p.m. Be there. Important. No please. No explanation. Just an expectation. Classic. I almost ignored it. Almost. But some part of me, the same part that spent too many years trying to earn a scrap of approval, thought, what if it's serious? What if they're sick? What if they finally want to talk? So against my better judgment, I replied, I'll be there. Sunday came. It was one of those sticky gray afternoons where everything feels heavier than it should. I parked in front of the house I grew up in, just sitting in the car for a minute, staring at it. Same cracked walkway, same faded blue siding. Nothing had changed except maybe a few more weeds in the yard. I knocked once out of habit before letting myself in. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, sharp and unpleasant. Victor was already seated at the kitchen table, a folder in front of him. Marianne was fussing at the counter, pretending to rearrange a bowl of plastic fruit. You're late, Victor said without looking up. It was 3:02 traffic. I lied, dropping my keys into my pocket. Marianne finally turned around, hands folded, smile thin as wax. Sit, Alan, she said. We have something important to discuss. I pulled out a chair, feeling oddly formal, like I was in a meeting with my old school principal. The table between us was empty, except for that folder neatly centered. Victor adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and pushed the folder toward me with 2 fingers. Go ahead, open it. I hesitated, glancing between them. Neither looked nervous. In fact, they looked satisfied, like they'd been planning this. I opened the folder. Inside was a thick packet of papers clipped neatly together. At the top of the first page, typed in bold letters, were the words, Summary of Expenses Raising Alan R. I blinked, thinking it must be some kind of joke. I glanced up, half laughing. You're not serious. Victor's face didn't so much as twitch. We are entirely serious, he said. That document details the costs we incurred raising you. It is a full accounting. Marianne nodded, adding helpfully, we included receipts were available. I flipped to the second page, then the third. It wasn't just broad categories either. It was absurdly detailed. Hospital delivery, $12,643. Childcare, ages 0 to 5, $37,900. Groceries. Alan's portion only estimated $22,450. Electricity and water usage based on occupancy, $8,120. Vacations. Alan's share, $6,600. There were hundreds of entries. Every soccer cleat, every eye exam, every Christmas gift over $50 had its own line item. I flipped toward the back. There was a grand total at the bottom, bolded and underlined. $27,533. I let out a slow breath, trying to process it. You want me to pay you $200,000? I asked, my voice strangely calm. Victor steepled his fingers. That is simply what is owed. We expect payment immediately. Marion chimed in. I stared at them, heart thudding slowly in my ears, not angry yet more stunned, like I had stepped into a world where logic no longer applied. And if I don't, I asked after a moment. Marion pursed her lips. We would prefer not to involve legal channels. There it was, the unspoken thread wrapped in a sugar-coated tone because of course it wasn't enough to make me feel guilty. They wanted to scare me too. I closed the folder, slowly sliding it back across the table. For a long second, I said nothing. I just looked at them, really looked at them. Same faces, same entitled smirks, same people who had spent my whole life making me feel like I owed them for existing. But what they didn't know was I hadn't come empty-handed either. Without a word, I reached down into my bag and pulled out a folder of my own thicker, heavier years in the making. I set it on the table, nice and deliberate. Marianne's smile faltered. Victor squinted at the folder like it might bite him. What's that? Victor asked. I opened it slowly, letting them see the first page. It was neatly organized too. My notes, my records, my proof. You kept track of your expenses? Marian asked, a note of confusion creeping into her voice. No, I said quietly. I kept track of yours. Their faces started to shift, first confusion, then a flicker of unease. Victor leaned back slightly in his chair, arms folding across his chest. He tried to play it off like he wasn't concerned, but I could tell from the slight tapping of his foot that he was getting antsy. Marianne, meanwhile, reached for her glass of water but didn't drink from it, just fidgeted with it in her hands. I let the first page sit there nice and visible. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. In neat, careful type, it read, Documented Contributions. Alan. Underneath was a list not of things they had given me, but of things I had paid for, covered, or contributed to once I became an adult. Even when I didn't have much to spare, I didn't say anything at first. I let them sit in it. Finally, Marian broke the silence. Her voice was tight. I don't understand. What exactly is this? I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table, meeting their eyes one at a time. This, I said slowly, is everything I've paid for on your behalf over the last 12 years. Victor scoffed under his breath, but his eyes didn't leave the paper. Marianne, however, still seemed determined to keep the upper hand. She gave a tight smile, the kind she wore at church when she didn't like someone but wanted to look gracious. Alan, we never asked you to pay for anything, she said in that sugar-sweet voice she always used when she was about to say something deeply cutting. No, I agreed. You didn't ask. You expected. There's a difference. I watched the flicker in Victor's eyes. He knew exactly what I meant, even if he wasn't ready to admit it out loud. I flipped to the next page. The sound of paper sliding over paper filled the tint's kitchen. The new list was even longer. Each item dated, each amount carefully noted. 2019 paid for Victor's car repairs $1,200. 2020 covered 3 months of their mortgage when Dad was between clients, $3,600. 2021 paid off Mom's credit card to prevent collections, $5,800. 2022 sent monthly grocery money for almost a year. $400 times 10 months equals $4,000. 2023 paid hospital bills after Dad's minor surgery not covered by insurance. $7,500. 2024 gave $2,000 gift when they claimed tax season wiped us out. And on, I didn't even list the smaller things. The holidays where I bought all the food. The times I took them out for dinner because things are tight right now. The countless little loans that were never repaid. All told, my total was just shy of $30,000. I saw Marianne's fingers tighten around her glass. Victor's jaw clenched so tightly I thought I heard his teeth click. I let them sit with that for a few moments, not to be cruel, but because for once I wanted them to feel even a fraction of what they made me feel growing up. Small-cornered, obligated. You kept track, Victor said finally, voice low and accusing. You taught me to? I said simply. And that was the truth. In a house where everything had a price and nothing was freely given, I learned young that documentation was survival. Marian straightened, trying to regain some kind of moral high ground. Arlon, that was your choice. We never forced you to. You're right, I cut in, my voice calm. I chose to help because I believed it was the right thing to do, because that's what family should do. Not because I expected to be invoiced for being your son. I could see the battle happening behind her eyes, wanting to lash out, but knowing that getting emotional would only make her look worse. Victor shifted in his seat, trying a different tactic. "Well," he said, clearing his throat. "Regardless, the numbers don't change the fact that you cost us far more over the years than you contributed. Parenting isn't free." I tilted my head slightly. No, I agreed again. It isn't, but it is a choice. Silence, heavy, uncomfortable, the kind they used to use on me when I disappointed them. Sitting in the living room for hours without speaking until I apologized for whatever invisible mistake I had made. But I wasn't a scared teenager anymore. I wasn't going to apologize. I tapped the last page of my folder, still untouched. "There's more," I said. Victor's eyes narrowed. Marian shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I didn't rush. I turned the page, slowly revealing a carefully printed document. At the top it read, "Notice of repayment demands voided." Below it, a simple paragraph, a statement prepared by my lawyer, a statement saying that any attempt to collect reparations for the cost of raising me would be considered harassment, and that I was prepared to take legal action if necessary. I watched the color drain slightly from Marianne's face. Victor's hand twitched toward the folder like he wanted to snatch it away and shred it before the words could sink in. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "I came prepared too," I said quietly. "You wanted to play business, fine, let's play." The clock ticked loudly in the background, filling the silence. I could almost see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to figure out if they could still salvage this somehow. Victor opened his mouth like he was about to say something clever, something to regain the upper hand, but I cut him off before he could even start. "I'm not just here to show you numbers," I said, voice low and steady. "I'm here because things are going to change." Marian blinked rapidly, like she couldn't quite process that I wasn't folding under the weight of their disappointment for once. She set her glass down harder than she meant to, and the clink of it against the table echoed in the tense kitchen. Victor leaned forward, hands clasped in front of him. "You think you can threaten us?" he said, trying for calm but missing it by a mile. His words came out sharp around the edges, like he was barely holding himself back. "I'm not threatening you," I said plainly. "I'm giving you notice." I reached into my bag again, pulling out a small stack of letters I had printed and neatly clipped together. I dropped them onto the table right next to my folder. The top one had the logo of the local community center. The next had a law office header. Another was from my accountant. Marianne's eyes darted between them, confusion flickering across her face. I let the moment breathe before explaining. "You remember last Christmas," I asked, "when you made a big show in front of the family about how you practically raised me alone and never got so much as a thank you?" Marianne stiffened, but said nothing. Victor drummed his fingers, once impatient. "Well," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I thought maybe you deserved some recognition after all, so I shared the full story." Victor's fingers froze mid-drum. "What story?" he asked sharply. I shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "The real one," I said. "How you'd leave me home alone for entire weekends when I was 10 because you needed time away. How you told me at 15 that if I wanted dinner, I could either cook it or go hungry. How you made me work every summer since I was 13, then borrowed my paychecks to fund your vacations." Marianne's face drained of color faster than I thought possible. Victor's knuckles turned white where they gripped the edge of the table. And since you like numbers so much, I continued sliding one of the clipped papers across the table to them. I also shared the financial records, every transfer, every loan, every gift that mysteriously turned into an obligation. I watched as their eyes flicked down the page. Marianne's hand trembled slightly as she turned it over, seeing the continuation on the back. "You shared this," she said, voice small. "With the community board," I said, ticking off points on my fingers. "With the church, with the charity you volunteer for, with the alumni association Dad's so proud of. And I seat the local paper's tip line, just for good measure." Victor's mouth opened, then closed again. His face was starting to turn an alarming shade of red. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words hit harder when they were calm and deliberate. "You built your whole social life on the story of how selfless you are, how much you sacrificed for me. People believed it because it's easier to believe a pretty lie than an ugly truth. But now," I said, smiling faintly, "they get to decide what they believe." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Victor shoved the papers away like they were burning him. "You're ruining your own reputation," he snapped, "dragging family business out into the street. It'll reflect badly on you too." I leaned forward slightly, voice dropping even lower. I'm not the one who's going to lose standing, I said. I don't have anything to lose. I'm not the one who spent 20 years playing the martyr for attention and handouts. I stood up slowly, letting my chair scrape gently against the tile. Marian finally found her voice again, shrill and brittle. You're ungrateful, she spat. Everything we did for you, you didn't do it for me, I said, cutting her off without raising my voice. You did it for the image. I gathered my papers, neatly sliding them back into the folder. 2 weeks ago, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. You handed me a bill for my childhood. I paused, looking them both in the eye. Today, I handed you the invoice for your lies. I turned to leave, but just before I reached the front door, Victor's voice rang out behind me. This isn't over, he said. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I glanced back once, just enough to see their furious, panicked faces. No, I agreed softly. It's not. Then I stepped outside into the chilly spring air, pulling the door closed behind me. The drive home that night was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Even though I kept replaying everything over and over, there was no part of me that wished I had handled it differently. Still, I knew better than to think it would end neatly just because I had walked away. Sure enough, 2 days later, the fallout began. First came the messages, long frantic texts from Marianne that shifted rapidly between guilt-tripping scolding and begging. Things like family doesn't air dirty laundry. You're ruining your father's health with all this stress. We did our best even if you can't appreciate it. You've broken our hearts. Victor, as usual, was quieter but somehow more threatening. His messages were short-clipped sentences. This will come back to you. You'll regret this. You think you've won? I didn't respond. I didn't engage. I had already set my boundaries when I walked out of that house. Responding would only give them more room to twist the situation and paint themselves as victims again. I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. Instead, I focused on keeping my distance and letting the truth do what it does best over time. And it did. Over the next week and a half, I started hearing from a few mutual acquaintances. Quiet, awkward phone calls or hesitant emails. Some were friends of the family. Some were people from the church or organizations where my parents had built their perfect parent reputation. Most of them didn't know what to say. Some tried to stay neutral. A few were angry at me, convinced I had exaggerated everything out of bitterness. But more often, what I heard was surprise. Doubt, even understanding. Apparently, once the surface was scratched, it wasn't that hard for people to start noticing the cracks. Stories that didn't add up. Fundraisers that mysteriously ended with little explanation. Loans they had quietly asked for, promising to pay back quickly, and then never mentioning again. One woman from their church actually told me in a voice full of regret, "You're not the only one they leaned on. We just never wanted to believe it." I didn't take any pleasure in hearing that. I didn't feel vindicated or powerful. Mostly, I just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that they had been given so many chances to be better and chose not to. Sad that in the end there was no big confrontation where they realized how wrong they were and apologized, because that's not how people like them operate. About a week ago. So just a little over a week after that night, my parents sent me what I can only describe as their final word on the matter, an email. It was short, cold, and formal. No apology, no real emotion, no ownership of anything they had done. Just a stiff paragraph stating that they accepted my decision to sever ties and that effective immediately they would no longer be extending invitations to family events unless I reconsidered my recent behavior and made appropriate amends. No acknowledgement of the years they spent chipping away at my self-worth. No mention of the manipulation, the gaslighting, the financial exploitation, not even a thin attempt at understanding, just a passive-aggressive message wrapped up in polite wording, making it clear that in their minds, I was the one who had wronged them. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time after reading it. There was a small part of me buried deep down that had still hoped, maybe foolishly, that they might see what they had done, that they might feel even a flicker of regret. That after everything there might be some kind of real closure. Instead, they gave me exactly what they had always given me. Distance disguised as dignity, silence masquerading as maturity. I read the email once, then I archived it without replying. That was the moment I realized something important. I didn't owe them anything. Not a defense, not an explanation, not even my silence or anger. Nothing. And that's where things stand now. I'm officially no contact with them. No more fake family dinners where every smile felt like it came with a hidden price tag. No more being summoned to gatherings just to be paraded around like some sort of prop. No more guilt trips disguised as checking-in calls. No more one-sided loyalty or loving meant sacrificing parts of myself over and over again. It's not easy, though. People like to talk about going no contact like it's flipping a switch cut. Done. Move on. But it's not like that. It feels more like stepping off a cliff into thick, you can't see what's ahead. You just have to trust that you'll land somewhere better than where you started. There's grief in it. A deep, aching grief. Not just for the parents I never really had, but for the younger version of myself who kept hoping they might show up differently. You grieve the birthdays that turned into competitions, the milestones they minimized, the love you poured into a well that only echoed back emptiness. But as the days have gone by, something unexpected has taken root too. Peace. For the first time in my life, I don't wake up with a knot in my stomach, wondering how I'm going to disappoint them next. I don't have to mentally armor myself before opening a text or walking into a holiday gathering. I don't have to wonder if today will be the day they find some new way to remind me that love was something I had to earn. I'm just living on my own terms, at my own pace, without looking over my shoulder all the time. And honestly, even though part of me will probably always wish it hadn't come to this, even though there's a scar where that hope used to live, the bigger, stronger part of me knows it was the best decision I've ever made. They sent me a bill for my childhood, and I handed them the true cost of their choices. And finally, for the first time, I chose myself.